like to call the Finance Committee meeting for November 4th, 2024 to order. And first item I want to talk about is temporary resolution 124-24. A resolution authorizes the Service Safety Director to dispense with competitive bidding and enter into a contract with Chapman Ford for the purchase of 4 police vehicles for use by the Lancaster Police Department. That is coming from Safety Committee and Councilman Bizjack.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Once again, this legislation, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's the plan to purchase 4 more police cruisers for our police department. The price is, anticipated to be around $184,240 for those cruisers. And yeah, Chief Snyder, I don't know if you got anything else to add, but that's, I mean, pretty cut and dry what it is. So.
Good evening. Nothing else to add. Same price as last year for 4 police cruisers that were in the budget.
Yep.
If you were on council a couple of years ago, we switched the rotation to try to get in on this first window, which is good for us. So nothing much to add.
So,
Ms. Tiener?
I do have a question. So I know it's 2 readings, but let's just say if we did 1 reading, could you order them sooner rather than later? I don't know if we would.
It's not going to hurt my feelings to do it in 1 reading for sure. And we could place the order with Chapman. Should Ford open the window in the next couple of weeks, we'd be first on the list. But either way, it's not going to.
Well, Councilmember Tiener, since you're my second on this legislation, would you be open then if I made the motion to waive the second and third readings?
Well,
would
yes,
you be open to seconding that?
Yes.
All righty.
We know who your second is. You're requesting suspension. Any other questions regarding suspension? So be it.
All righty.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Temporary resolution 125-24, a resolution to authorize the Service Safety Director to accept Bureau of Workers' Compensation Safety Intervention Grant funds. Also coming from Safety and Councilman Bizjack.
So I'll explain this one, but and I'll share some more details about it afterwards. Anyway, this is once again accepting safety intervention grant funds from the Bureau of Workers' Compensation, the amount of $29,173.50. These are going to be used for power cots at the fire department. The fire department's the one who's receiving them. This is just to help protect and keep our firefighters safe and prevent additional back injuries when lifting folks with power cots. One thing I do want to add, though, Mr. Chair, is I am not going to be the sponsor. I already talked to the Clerk of Council before we started here. Due to my employment at the Bureau of Workers' Compensation, I'll have to abstain in this vote. So Councilmember Tiener will actually be the first on this one, and Councilmember Ehlers will be the second. And we are requesting suspension.
Great. Any questions, concerns about suspension? Moving on. Temporary resolution 126-24, a resolution to authorize the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for consultant services to implement and administer the 2023 Community Housing Impact and Preservation Program and to declare emergency. Coming from Economic Development Committee, Councilman.
Yes, this is just coming out of to help out with contracting personnel to administer the CHIP program. And my second is going to be Mrs. Kreitz.
Okay. Did you have any comments from anybody in that department? I see she's sitting back there.
Oh, there she is. Yeah, if you want to.
You explained it very well. She came all the way out.
Yeah, sorry.
Did.
I didn't see you here.
Oh, you're fine.
Thank
Good
you.
evening, President Porter, council members. The Community Development Department has met with a nonprofit organization called Ohio Regional Development. So their purpose is to apply and administer CHIP programs, other CBDG grants. They work with 28 communities across Ohio. Assisting with these programs. So a quick recap on why we're asking for this legislation. Community Development has 1 housing specialist. Right now he's currently running 2 programs, the Healthy Homes and the CBDG. And we have until February 2026 to use these funds. So in order to get this program moving and to avoid any more untimeliness, we felt that this might be the better way to kind of get a jump start on everything. So this legislation is just to allow the SSD to advertise for an RFP and to enter into a contract to administrate this program.
Any idea how much they charge?
I think it is 10 to 12% of the hard cost. But that hasn't been, completely discussed. That was just kind of an estimate they threw out, so.
Does that satisfy your
Yes,
question?
thank you.
That answer, okay, okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments, concerns about suspension? I hear none, and we will suspend. Thank you. Now we have temporary resolution 127-24, a resolution to increase receipts appropriate from the unencumbered balance and amend certificate of other sources and appropriations with the county auditor in the Police and Fire Pension Fund 2028. This is from Finance Committee, and I would turn it over to Auditor Nettles for discussion.
Yes, this is, we're kind of done with the settlements. We received kind of our last settlement from the county auditor's office in October. And good news is we got more settlement money for the Police and Fire's Employer Pension Fund than was anticipated off the last year's Schedule A for this year. So I need to appropriate those funds, set a revenue budget, increase the revenue budget so I can appropriate those additional funds into the appropriate line items, so then we can settle up in the expenses for those employer pensions.
And you're requesting a one reading suspension?
Yes, please, so we can get that settled and the budgets, everything done appropriately.
Any questions from council regarding suspension or questions regarding legislation? Councilman Ehlers, you'll be my second.
Yep.
Thank you, and I'll be the sponsor. Thank you. 128-24, excuse me, a resolution to increase receipts appropriate from the unencumbered balance and amend the certificate of other source and appropriations with the county auditor in the Public Transit Fund. Obviously coming from finance, I am sponsor, and Councilman Ailes, you'll be the second.
Yes.
And Auditor Nettles, would you like to comment?
Yes, this is the kind of getting near the end of the public transit's transfer from the city. We're still holding on to public transit's cash that they had as brought in receipts for this year. Believe it or not, there was a final large $300,000 pay-in that we received that even after they were gone, ODOT, because the grant was still made payable to the city, so they had to deposit into our accounts. So we deposited those monies, so we need to, again, set a revenue budget and expense budget so then we can get the cash transferred or paid out to the county.
Okay, and you're asking for suspension?
Please, they're waiting on the cash.
They're waiting on the cash with bated breath. Okay. Any objections to suspension? Then we'll do that. That's it for the resolutions. Ordinances, temporary ordinance 42-24, an ordinance to provide for the issuance and sale of notes in the maximum principal amount of $500, corrected copy, $360,000, in anticipation of the issuance of bonds for the purpose of paying the cost of the renovation of an existing building for use by city's municipal court, together with all necessary appurtenances thereto, and declare an emergency coming from finance. I'm the sponsor, and Mr. Ailes, you'll be the second.
Yes.
And we're requesting 2 readings. Auditor Nettles. How many
This
times
isn't-
more times are we going to hear this?
I know, this seems to be my show tonight, doesn't it? This is an annual note piece that we've been doing for the Columbian Courthouse. They paid down, last year's note was $540,000. They put down on the principal $180,000. So we're renewing the note for $360,000, so they're paying down each year. But this is for the improvements, cost overruns on the Columbian building. And it comes, the new note is in December, so that's why I'm asking for 2 readings, so we can get it processed with bond counsel and get the notes settled.
Very good. Thank you. Questions of council? I hear none. Thank you. One more time. Temporary ordinance 4324, an ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of revenue notes in the aggregate principal amount of $715,555.42 to pay cost of improving Edie Road, Memorial Drive, and Michaels Way by grading, widening, paving, curbing, and improving bridge and railroad crossings, relocation of utilities and installing sidewalks, traffic signals and signs, and water, sanitary, and storm water lines and facilities together with all necessary appurtenances thereto, and declaring an emergency. Again, finance. Councilman Ehlers, you'll be my second. 2 readings.
This is the annual TIF developer notes that the principal gets paid down by the TIF real estate settlements, the TIF settlements that are collected by the developers or the businesses within the TIF. That's what gets paid for principal and interest. So this is just an annual piece, and these notes become due in December. So it's getting paid down slowly but surely, but we're getting it down. We're down to $715,555.42. So this is just an annual piece.
Thank you. And I believe memory serves me 6 more readings, 6 more years. I think it's
Hopefully.
3031. Is it 2029?
There we go.
Thank you, Denise. I know you would know better than me. Any questions? Thank you. Moving on. Temporary ordinance 44-24, an ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of a revenue note in the aggregate principal amount of $221,964.23 to reimburse Flagstar Bank, FSB, for the draw on the letter of credit in connection with cost of improving Edie Road, Memorial Drive, and Michaels Way by grading, widening, paving, curving, and improving bridges and railroad crossings, relocating utilities, and installing sidewalks, traffic signals and signs, and water, sanitary, and stormwater lines and facilities together with all necessary appurtenances thereto, and declaring an emergency. Coming from finance, I'm the sponsor, and Councilman Ailes, you'll be
Yes.
the second, and we've got 2 readings there.
This is part of the TIF settlement, the TIF settlements portion of it. This is the letter of credit that we have with Island Capital and/or Flagstar Bank. That this is just an annual piece that we're paying down those notes and that debt due.
Very good. And we're looking at 2 readings. Any questions, comments? You're back there. Did you want to talk about any of this stuff? Good answer. I thought maybe you wanted to explain the bankruptcy. Didn't think so. Temporary ordinance 4524. I'm going to read, there are 7 of these items, and the following ordinances: 4524, 4624, 4724, 4824, 4924, 5024, and 5124 all deal with annual compensation for 7 different areas of the city of Lancaster, excluding the collective bargaining units. So therefore, they're all going to read the same with different departments. I think you can follow with me. An ordinance to establish the benefits, titles, and compensation for Information Technology Administrator, Office of the Clerk of Courts, employed by the City of Lancaster, Ohio, commencing the first pay period of 2025, and to declare an emergency. So again, each of them have a different department name, but I think we can probably go through all that together. And I'm assuming, and all these will be 3 readings, and I'll go through the seconds to make sure everybody's got them. And I would suggest maybe Service Safety Director Woody would like to have comments on anything?
Yes, certainly. As you mentioned, Chairman Wolfinger, these are just annual pay ordinance pieces. They typically accompany the budget when we introduce the budget, but again, like we had mentioned at the last meeting, we wanted to get the budget to you early to give everyone time to really review it. So we were able to finalize the pay ordinances and get these to you this evening. Again, they just establish all the titles, benefits for the management and non-union employees in the city.
Questions? I did not hear or read, what is the pay increase on these schedules?
For the non-union and management, the majority, there, so in the pay ordinances, the ones that are in the tables are 4%, is what was proposed.
Okay. And what about the other departments?
And there are a couple that are their own pays, that it wasn't based on those tables. And so like the very first one, 4524, the information technology, that pay is decided by the courts. So it is what they said it was, and I don't know if it was based on a percentage or if they just stated, but it is, the amount's listed in the ordinance, and I don't know what that was based on. Any that have to do with the courts, they choose their own salaries.
Okay.
And then in the management ordinance, under section, is it section 4 maybe? There are, I want to say 5 titles that are outside section 2 and section 3 of the management ordinance, 4824, that are outside of those tables that are just listed as salaries.
So there must be a percent for those salaries to increase?
There are, but I do not recall those do you recall the percentages, Mayor?
They're less than 4%. I think it was 3.75 approximately.
Is there less than 2.7?
No, go ahead.
Is there less than 3.75 in any of these?
Yes.
Okay, is there any way, like, I mean, I know we have the steps and all this, but is there any way we could get through the non-union, the percentages from last year to this year? Is there anything, way we could have that sent to us, this is the percentages, rather than the steps? I do better with the percentages from last year's pay to what they're
They're
getting.
4% for everyone but a handful of city employees. But yes, we can give you last year's tables and this year's tables.
If I can have the percentages, I
Certainly.
would appreciate it.
The tables are all going to be 4%. The tables
So
are
the-
all going to be 4%.
Yeah, so the tables that are attached in your exhibits are all 4% in the
I've
tables.
looked at them, I just wanted to kind of see, because I know some people have just started in a new position, and I just kind of wanted to see where they were at, what they were getting. You know, some people have started in new positions this year, to see what, are you waiting to bump them up next year, or?
They would just follow these tables. So if you would take the range that they're in your
Right,
pay
I know.
ordinance.
Becky?
And then you would just follow
Could
the
you
steps.
turn your mic on, please?
Sorry.
Mr. Mayor, could you turn your mic on, please?
Oh,
It's on.
yeah, if I could just have the percentages on there, all the non-union, I'd appreciate
Just
that.
ask.
Yep, thank you.
Other questions of council? Okay. Didn't mean to put you on the spot. Normally we
that's
talk
okay.
about, I know this is everybody's first budget, and we all like to know what kind of percent's out there. And correct me if I'm wrong, the union negotiated units, the fire and police is 5% each year for 3 years. And
Correct.
this will be the second year.
Correct.
Of the increase, which is for 2025, for fire and police. And the other.
ASME was
ASME is
4%.
4%. Everybody got that down? Because we have a lot of new council persons. They didn't get to participate last year, nor did I, in all the fun of talking about raises and contracts. Good, thank you. I appreciate your patience with me. And unless there's any other questions, I want to go quickly through the sponsor and the second. Obviously, Councilman Lichtenberg will be the sponsor on all 7 pieces. 5524, I show Bizjack. I show Wolfinger on 60, or 4624. 4724, I show Bizjack. Back to 4824, I show Wolfinger. 4924, back to Bizjack. 5024, back to me. And 5124, back to Bizjack. You're agreeable? And I guess I'm agreeable too. Thank you. Anything else to come before legislation? No walk-ins or anything like that. So let me move on to other discussion items. We'll look at departmental updates, if there are any.
Good evening, council. Just one quick update. Driven on South Broad Street, it's just about done. Pavement's down, curbs are fixed, no more potholes, but they are in the process of raising the castings and valve boxes to grade. So they got a few of those left to go and some striping. And then it'll be fully open for business. So getting complaints about speed. This guy right here is going to get 4 new cruisers. All right? That's all I've got. Thanks.
Any questions? I guess not. Thank you very much. Any other departmental updates? I see none. Moving on to tonight's meeting prep with President Porter.
We have no special presentations this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Other items for Finance Committee. I believe Mayor McDaniel is asking for us to table temporary resolution 110-24 because it is due for third reading tonight, and that is the budget, and the budget will be tabled and to be presented or taken off the table at a later date, depending how the numbers go. And would you like to make any comments?
Sure. As Chairman Wolfinger stated, we'd like council to consider tabling the budget tonight after the third reading. We're going to continue to comb through the budget, make any appropriate changes. As you know, we're reviewing the entire budget, both general fund and enterprise departments, and we want to be able to assure any increases are reasonable and justified. As we talked about the pay raises, reminder, the collective bargaining agreement locks us in on police and fire and AFSCME. That is the majority of our employees. Obviously, we have employees at courts locked in by the court. They make a recommendation on their budget. I don't know what that percentage is on their pay raises, but I assume that it's probably 4%. I haven't put it to the calculator to verify it, but I'm going to guess it probably is. We saw a 1% increase in our health insurance premium, which is, as you may know, much lower than anything around Central Ohio. So I think we've done pretty well there. You've seen some consolidation of departments, and I know that we expanded departments previously. The consolidation's done to save people, so we can reduce staffing by consolidating, sharing an administrative assistant, sharing resources. Working in the same area also provides, in my opinion, a better access to our services by the community. For instance, Community Development Department now consists of planning, zoning, building, and community development under one roof. When you come in and want city services, you're not being sent from building to building. We're going to take care of you there. But we're also sharing resources within that department. So we're going to have, in my opinion, better communication, better access for the community, and saving money for our taxpayers. We do still have the engineer's office over in the annex because we just can't fit everybody at City Hall. But we're going to work through that, and we're working on other mechanisms to make that communication flow a little bit better, to make sure we're all on the same page. For instance, there would be people who tell you that they went to the building department, that everything the building department told them to do, and then they went to the zoning department and said, oh, you didn't fill out the right form, you need this form, et cetera, et cetera. We've all heard those stories. We think this consolidation will help resolve most of those issues and make this more of a user-friendly approach for the community. As Mayor Scheffler stated when he wanted to go with a city planner, he envisioned a one-stop shop I think this step helps us get closer to that goal. So, but it also saves us money because we're sharing people, sharing resources. Also, the IT GIS, we are sharing administrative assistant there. We're sharing resources there. And GIS is moving to the annex building to be with IT. Again, administrative assistant will work for both of those departments, not just one. GIS will still be doing GIS. IT will still be doing IT, but there's things they can do together and be more efficient. Again, the hope is to save money for the taxpayer and get better service for the taxpayer. Enterprise zones, you see increases in our project cost and our material cost because everybody across the country is seeing those increases. Here's something we are looking at. I wanted to run it past you tonight in consideration. Those of you who have been on the building committee about updating City Hall, firehouses, et cetera, know that we likely need a facilities director. 3 years ago, we had the air conditioning go out at the police department, and Chief Snyder had to make himself an expert in writing everything up to get the air conditioning replaced at the police department. That's really not something the chief of police should be tasked with. We would like to have council consider a facilities director who would work for the safety service director, but manage our facilities. Everything from the firehouses, the police department, to City Hall. We're talking about preventive maintenance. We're talking about how old is our roof? How old's the boiler? How old's the air conditioning? What do we need here? What do we need there? What are our priorities? The committee that we have is working through some of that, and we'll have some of that in place for this person. But we're not facilities experts either. We can't devote full time to facilities, but our facilities have been neglected for years. We put Band-Aids on them when we need it. We made it through tough times. We had no money. But we have to have a long-term plan, and I think a person in that position could help us make sure that our plan is sound and that we can do it effectively. For instance, if we have, and we know we're going to be renovating City Hall to the tune of $4.5 million. This committee that we have together has already felt that was the appropriate thing to do. Who's going to manage that project? Well, I would hope that our facilities director would manage that project. If not, it's managed by someone else who doesn't have necessarily the time to devote towards a project to make sure everything is done appropriately and accurately and efficiently, and also where we can save cost and look at our expenses and make sure that we're getting the bang for our buck and the taxpayers are getting a return for their investment. We're going to have somebody manage that project. We can contract with somebody, or if it were a city employee managing our entire facility inventory, then they could also do the project management. So that's something I would like council to consider. I don't know that we put together a proposal to actually bring to you, but we're working on one, which would outline job description, proposed duties and responsibilities as part of that job description, as well as a recommended salary range for your consideration. I put that out there because it's something we probably needed 10 years ago, and we just haven't been able to do it at this point. So unless you have questions on that, I'm going to move on. But we are continuing to review budgets, and any changes and reductions we will have for you, along with a summary sheet. So we went verbally through some of these changes, but I want to, in writing, draw your attention to some of them. So we'll outline salary information, changes in, significant changes in the budget, like additions of equipment and or things like that, to draw your attention to as many of those things as possible. I know you have the hard copy. I know you went through them. I know many of you read the notes. I'm just going to try to bring it into a more concise document so you can look at it and say, oh, I want to look here and see what this is. But again, questions. If you have them, I've had several of you come in and meet with me. stop me and talk to me. Feel free to do that anytime. We can set up a meeting if necessary. We'll go through any questions you might have, find the answers that you may need. Director Woody is willing to do the same, as well as our department heads. So we want to answer your questions, get that information to you in a timely fashion so you can make an informed decision on the budget. So this time, any questions that anyone might have? Yes, Steve?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with the need for a facilities director. Having done several projects with the county and working with their facilities director, I think it's just vital that the city has that. But I would suggest that you include that role, even if it's not filled, that we put it in the 2025 budget, just in anticipation of making that hire, so that you've got the funds already set aside for that position.
Yeah, I would hope and council would be interested in looking at that position, and we can certainly include it. And then obviously get you some numbers and some details on that as we move forward.
Yeah.
Other questions of the mayor? I know many of you, or some of you, have had committee meetings with your committee. Some of you have questions now or whatever. Councilman Fitzgerald.
I don't have any questions. Just I appreciate your comments, Mayor McDaniel, and I personally looking forward to the facilities director myself. I mean, in my professional career, I've seen the savings that a facilities director can have in multiple municipalities and another public organization. So I look forward to seeing where that turns out. And then as far as the safety committee goes, I know we had a special safety committee meeting. Once again, I appreciate everybody who attended, sacrificing their time at 6 p.m. To come out. But we had a good, robust discussion, and looking forward to see what the final version of the budget will look like when we go to vote on it. So thank you. Appreciate all of you making your time.
Mr. Mayor, I know earlier this year we discussed the concept of the facilities director at the courts. I know that they were looking to fill a position. Do we know if that position has been filled?
So they've got somebody working there. Yeah, I'm not sure what their title or responsibility is.
I believe they're a facilities maintenance, and they do more maintenance type than they do.
Okay.
Like-
Would we envision a facilities director also? I know we've referenced the fire station, the police station. Would they also undertake looking at that building and working in that capacity at that building as well?
Probably so. Yeah, we're responsible for that building.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would say, I think that our vision would be that they would start looking at all of the city-owned buildings.
Okay.
So that they can kind of help prioritize all of the city's facilities, not just the police, fire, and city hall.
Great.
Chairman Wolfinger, I forgot to add one thing that is also in line with the consolidations that we've tried to do at City Hall. As you know, when Gretchen resigned and moved on, we also consolidated HR into the service director, safety director's office, sharing our admin assistants amongst the administrative offices. So we were able to essentially move our HR coordinator, Danielle, into the safety director's office, sharing those resources. And we did not replace Danielle's position when she got promoted. So in an effort to try to streamline things and make them more efficient, that's what we're trying to do. That was the goal when I took office, was to try to reduce our burden on the general fund as much as possible. But I did not mention there is an addition to the general fund that I think is sorely needed and actually well overdue. And it is adding a ComTech to the police 911 center. And in 1989, we had 12 ComTechs. In 2024, we have 12 ComTechs. We have added a ComTech supervisor to oversee that operation, but we have not added the person in the room operating the 911 center. And here is the benefit for that and why I think it's critically important. It happens to be all ladies in 911 right now, but the ladies often miss their breaks because they have a lunch hour, but their lunch hour can be interrupted for emergencies. And as you know, there's many emergencies in the 911 center. Not only that, they're dedicated. They don't want to leave their partner behind. So they'll go into a break room and they're nearby waiting for, hey, I need you. And they come running. This person would allow a break relief person to make sure that our dispatchers actually get an opportunity to take a break and get out of that room and get reinvigorated and come back to the job fresh. I've seen that job for many years. It's the toughest job in the city. When they are busy and they are answering calls from everybody, they are the first line of communication with the public in crisis. They do a wonderful job, but we aren't taking care of them when we need to because we haven't had the ability until now to look at adding. So during day shift, the ComTech supervisor will relieve those dispatchers to make sure they get their lunch break. And during second and third shift, this new, I'll call it a relief dispatcher, but it's an extra dispatcher for the same purpose of relieving the other dispatchers so they can get their breaks. And it also adds another body in that room. And that room can be extremely busy, extremely busy. 60,000+ calls for service. Actually, I think the number is closer to 70,000 calls for service. And then throw in another, Chief Maffin, how many medic runs? 10,500. So let's click 90,000 calls for service with police and fire combined. They all come through that room, and we do a fantastic job, but we need to add this relief ComTech. So that's the increase you saw in staffing in the general fund. Police and fire staffing remains the same as last year, except for the ComTech.
Well, if we had 12 of those in 1980,
1989,
89, and we still only have 12, but our population's increased by how much?
yes, you see my,
Yeah, I mean,
See my
I would
point.
think that we should need maybe 2 or 3 more of them.
we probably do, but the chief and I have talked. This is a great step forward.
Yeah.
But it is a very busy room, and its space is limited. So we probably need to look at that too, but that's a different topic for another day. Chief Snyder, did I sum that up pretty well, or do you have anything to add?
In 1989, we had 28,000 calls for service.
Yeah.
We have over 70,000 in 2024.
Yeah, you could almost double the number, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Anything else you have?
No, sir.
Surface Safety Director. I do have a couple comments. Let me refer you back to temporary ordinance 42-24. That's the $360,000 renewal. That came about, for the history lesson, we had a $1.8 million hole in doing the municipal court building. We had basically a committed $8 million contract, and we Auditor Nettles close to 12. And we had internal funds, and we scraped it together. And so we had $1.8 million left over. But we never had anybody, a project manager, excuse me. Even though we made a plea for it, it just didn't happen. So right there, that one project would probably pay for this position for 10 years. And we can't do buildings. Being the architect, you know that.
Right.
And the second comment I want to make, or question, that position description, I don't know if you have one that you're going to use, or whether you've gotten something off the internet, but you got to have some real technical expertise to manage a project like that and other properties. So, yes.
What I've done is there's a Central Ohio HR network, so I've reached out to them to get job descriptions. And so I'm looking through all of those currently to kind of finalize what we want in our position description.
Perfect. Perhaps Councilman Luchtenberg, being the architect, being involved in a lot of projects, like a firehouse, like those types of things, you might be willing to talk to each other to get some expertise in order to make sure we have a position description that will fit our need. And one last, the bad one, how much is that going to cost us, potentially? You probably have that survey also. But I think I'm hearing from council that there's support, maybe not unanimous support at this point in time, and we're anxious to see that program develop, and you will try to put this in the budget for 2025. Okay. Didn't mean to, I just feel this is critical and we need to address it the proper way. Not that it's not being proper, it's just the fact it's going to cost some money. And I think we all need to understand that, depending on what you want to do.
And again, I think I mentioned it, but it will get our police chief, fire chief, and other people out of
Right.
doing all that work themselves. I know that it's not a burden we should have on them. They've got pretty big operations already, and a lot of time is devoted to running the building. Not saying they won't have some time involved in the building, but they won't have a lot of time involved in the building. That's the hope anyway.
Right. Yeah, and if the number comes in high, maybe you go back to the drawing board and you hire an engineer, a structural engineer for construction projects. That takes some of the specialty away from that position description, which might lower the overall cost of the position, because we're not going to be building buildings every day. So there's a lot of ways to approach that, but I commend you both for taking the effort to get it on the table.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think probably at least as important, if not maybe even more important, is just the maintenance and the upkeep of existing buildings. So many of our buildings are just, 50, 60 years old or more. And if they haven't had attention for the last 10 years, I think that's job number one or project number one for them. But yeah, new construction as well.
Right.
Very important to have a project manager.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Any other items to be brought up in the other items for finance? I would entertain a motion for,
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
and I guess I need to do a roll call. Mr. Ailes,
Yes.
Mr. Ehlers,
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover,
Yes.
and I vote yes. We are adjourned. It's at 6:41.
The regular meeting of Lancaster City Council will commence at 6:45.
Hi, I'm Corey Clark with Fairfield County Job and Family Services. Our mission is to protect children and elderly, encourage family stability, and promote self-reliance for a stronger community. This month, when you buy a car, truck, or SUV from Buckeye Toyota or Buckeye Honda, Buckeye Cares program will make a donation with every vehicle they sell. From all of us at Fairfield County Job and Family Services, thank you, Buckeye, for your ongoing support for local families.
The Frankie Smith Funeral Home and Crematory in Lancaster and the Johnson Smith Funeral Home in Baltimore have a long and wonderful history of serving our community. Feel free to give us a call at 740-653-0652. Stop in and see us at either of our two locations, 405 North Columbus Street in Lancaster and 207 South Main Street in Baltimore. Respect for tradition, regard for change.
If you will rise if able and join me in a moment of prayer. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things that we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and finally, the wisdom to know the difference. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Call to order the November 4th, 2024 Lancaster City Council meeting. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers? Here. Mr. Ailes?
Here.
Mr. Bizjack?
Here.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Here.
Mrs. Hoop? Here. Mr. Leuchtenberg?
Here.
Mr. Schoonover?
Here.
Ms. Teener? Here. Mr. Wing?
Here.
And Mr. Wolfinger?
Here.
Let the record reflect all 10 members of Lancaster City Council are present. We'll now move on to the reading and disposing of the journal.
Regular meeting minutes dated October 28th, 2024.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the journal.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to receive and file the journal. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. We will now move on to the reports of city officials.
Email dated November 1st, 2024 regarding rearrangement of offices in City Hall submitted by Service Safety Director Woody. Email dated November 4th, 2024, notification of cancellation in November Planning Commission meeting submitted by City Planner Chaslin Carter. Series of emails between Law Director Hall, Councilman Leuchtenberg, and President Porter regarding plat and map exhibits. That's it.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the reports of city officials.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to receive and file the reports of city officials. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the same sign. We'll now move on to communications.
Series of emails dated October 29th regarding a reminder notice of an exempt conveyance from the Lancaster Port Authority submitted by Lori Kidder of Fairfield County.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the communications.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to receive and file the communications. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. No special awards and presentations this evening. No petitions and memorials. We now move to the permission of voters and taxpayers to address council. Are there any individuals here this evening that would choose to address council? Seeing none, we thank you for attending the meeting. We move now to the reports of standing committees.
Finance Committee minutes dated October 29th, 2024, submitted by Mr. Wolfinger. Safety Committee minutes dated November 1st, 2024, submitted by Mr. Bizjack. Finance Committee minutes dated November 2nd, 2024, submitted by Mr. Wolfinger.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the reports of standing committees.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to receive and file the reports of standing committees. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Reports of special committees.
There are none.
Public hearings, we do not have any this evening, so we will now move on to the reading of resolutions, beginning with the third reading of temporary resolution 10824.
A resolution to appoint a business representative to the Board of Directors of the Violent Township, City of Lancaster, Joint Economic Development District. This is by Law Committee, Mrs. Kreitz and Mr. Bizjack.
Councilmember Kreitz.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 108-24.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 10824. Councilmember Kreitz.
Yes, thank you. This is to appoint a business representative to the JED board that would be expanded, for the JED being expanded.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. Bizjack?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoop?
Yes.
Mr. Leuchtenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Wing?
Yes.
And Mr. Wolfinger?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 10824 passes 10-0. We're now moving to temporary resolution 11024.
A resolution to make appropriations for planned 2025 budget, expenses and other expenditures of the City of Lancaster for fiscal year 2025 and to establish line item transfer authority for all city departments. Finance Committee, Mr. Wolfinger and Mr. Ehlers.
Councilmember Wolfinger.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council place on the table temporary resolution 110-24.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to place on the table temporary resolution 11024. This is a non-debatable motion, and we would now call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. Bizjack?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoop?
Yes.
Mr. Luchtenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Wing?
Yes.
And Mr. Wolfinger?
Yes.
The motion to table temporary resolution 11024 passes 10-0. We will now move on to the second reading of resolutions, beginning with temporary resolution 11424.
A resolution to authorize the Service Safety Director to enter into an engineering agreement for various construction administration services for the solids handling and replacement project. Water Pollution Committee, Mr. Wing and Ms. Tina.
Councilmember Wing.
This will be the second of three readings, please.
Second of three readings on temporary resolution 11424. We'll now move on to temporary resolution 11524.
A resolution to authorize the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids for the solids handling facility replacement project. Water Pollution Committee, Mr. Wing and Mr. Ailes.
Councilmember Wing.
This will be the second of three, please.
Second of three readings on temporary resolution 11524. Temporary resolution 11624.
A resolution to appropriate funds in the Water Reserve Fund 6027 and authorize payment of bills for the Ohio Water Development Loan for the South Water Plant Booster Pump Project. Water Pollution Committee, Mr. Wing and Ms. Teener.
Councilmember Wing.
Yeah, this is the second reading, and I want to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 11624.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to waive the rules, motion to waive the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 11624. If I could get that out tonight, it would be great. Any discussion?
Yes, as we discussed last week, we have a few invoices that have come in that we have to pay for the booster pumps, the South Water Plant, so that's what this is for.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the motion to suspend? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. Bizjack?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoop?
Yes.
Mr. Luchtenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Wing?
Yes.
Mr. Wolfinger?
Yes.
Motion to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 11624 passes 10-0. Councilmember Wing.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution number 11624.
Second.
A motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 11624. Any further discussion, Councilmember Wing?
Nothing to add.
Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. Bizjack?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoop?
Yes.
Mr. Luchtenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Wing?
Yes.
And Mr. Wolfinger?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 11624 passes 10-0. Temporary resolution 11724.
A resolution to authorize the Service Safety Director to enter into a contract with Fairfield Healthcare Professionals, Inc. to provide professional healthcare and wellness services to the City of Lancaster employees and their dependents and to declare an emergency. This is Administrative Committee, Mr. Luchtenberg and Mr. Bizjack.
Councilmember Luchtenberg.
Second and three readings.
Second of three readings on temporary resolution 11724. Temporary resolution 11824.
A resolution to authorize the Service Safety Director to enter into a contract with the Renaissance Counseling and consultation to provide professional mental health counseling services to the City of Lancaster employees and their dependents and to declare an emergency. Administrative Committee, Mr. Luchtenberg and Mr. Wolfinger.
Councilmember Luchtenberg.
Second of three readings.
Second of three readings on temporary resolution 11824. We will now move on to the first reading of resolutions, and virtually all of those are suspensions this evening, so we will be moving into temporary resolution 124-24.
A resolution to authorize the Service Safety Director to dispense with competitive bidding and enter into a contract with Chapman Ford for the purchase of 4 police vehicles for use by Lancaster Police Department. Safety Committee, Mr. Bizjack and Ms. Teener.
Councilmember Bizjack.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third readings for resolution temporarily numbered 124-24.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 124-24. We typically favor going with 3 readings on resolutions, but in these cases this evening, due to the number of meetings that we have left, we are suspending on a number of pieces of legislation. Is there any further discussion on the motion to suspend? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. Bizjack?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoop?
Yes.
Mr. Leuchtenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Wayne?
Yes.
And Mr. Wolfinger?
Yes.
Motion to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 124-24 passes 10-0. Councilmember Bizjack.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporarily resolution numbered 124-24.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 124-24. Any further discussion?
No, Mr. President.
Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. Bizjack?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoop?
Yes.
Mr. Leuchtenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Wayne?
Yes.
Mr. Wolfinger?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 124-24 passes 10-0. Temporary resolution 125-24.
A resolution to authorize the Service Safety Director to accept Bureau of Worker Compensation's Safety Intervention Grant Funds. Safety Committee, Ms. Teener and Mr. Ehlers.
Councilmember Teener.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 125-24.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to
My mind
suspend the
went.
rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 125-24. Discussion.
I'll wait.
Thank you. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. Bizjack?
Abstain.
Oh, sorry. Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoop?
Yes.
Mr. Leuchtenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Wing?
Yes.
And Mr. Wolfinger?
Yes.
Motion to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 125-24 passes 9-0 with 1 abstention. Councilmember Teener.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 125-24.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 125-24. Councilmember Teener.
Yes, this is a grant that was issued to the fire department, and they are purchasing kind of lift chairs for each of the departments, so that kind of helps them so they don't get hurt.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
I abstain.
Okay.
I'm not Kreitz,
Okay,
but I
just-
abstain.
I was going to say, do I say your name, Mr.
Yeah.
Bizjack? Mrs.
Yes.
Kreitz? Mrs. Hoop?
Yes.
Mr. Leuchtenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Wing?
Yes.
And Mr. Wolfinger?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 125-24 passes 9-0 with 1 abstention. Temporary resolution 126-24.
A resolution to authorize the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for consultant services to implement and administer the prior year 2023 Community Housing Impact and Preservation Program and declare an emergency. Economic Development, Mrs. Hoop and Mrs. Kreitz.
Councilmember Hoop.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 126-24.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 126-24. Any discussion, Councilmember
I'll
Hoop?
save it.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. Bizjack?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoop?
Yes.
Mr. Leuchtenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Wing?
Yes.
And Mr. Wolfinger?
Yes.
Motion to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 12624 passes 10-0. Councilmember Hoop.
Yes. I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record a temporary resolution 12624.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 12624. Any further discussion, Councilmember Hoop?
Yeah, we talked about this in finance, but it's just a contract personnel to facilitate the CHIP program.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. Bizjack?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoop?
Yes.
Mr. Luchtenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Wing?
Yes.
And Mr. Wolfinger?
Yes.
Motion to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 12624 passes 10-0. Temporary resolution 12724.
A resolution to increase receipts appropriate from the unencumbered balance and amend the certificate of other sources and appropriations from the county auditor and the police and fire pension fund 2028. This is Finance Committee with Mr. Wolfinger and Mr. Ayers.
Councilmember Wolfinger.
Mr. President, I would like to make the motion that council suspend its rules and waives the second and third readings on temporary resolution 127-24.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 12724. Discussion, Councilmember Wolfinger.
Thank you. The city of Lancaster received more revenue from county settlements than anticipated on the Schedule A of the resolution, and this is to adjust the revenue and expense budgets.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the motion to suspend? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. Bizjack?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoop?
Yes.
Mr. Luchtenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Wing?
Yes.
And Mr. Wolfinger?
Yes.
Motion to suspend the rules, waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 12724 passes 10-0. Councilmember Wolfinger.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 127-24.
Second.
A motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 12724. Any further discussion? Councilmember Wolfinger.
No.
Thank you. Hearing no further discussion, please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. Bizjack?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoop?
Yes.
Mr. Luchtenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Wing?
Yes.
And Mr. Wolfinger?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 12724 passes 10-0. Temporary resolution 12824.
A resolution to increase receipts appropriate from the unencumbered balance and amend the certificate of other sources and appropriations with the county auditor and the public transit fund 2021. Again, this is Finance Committee, Mr. Wolfinger and Mr. Ailes.
Councilmember Wolfinger.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspends its rules and waives the second and third reading of temporary resolution 128-24.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 12824. Any discussion, Councilmember
I'll
Wolfinger?
hold it.
Thank you. Hearing no further discussion, please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. Bizjack?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoop?
Yes.
Mr. Luchtenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Teener? Mr. Wing?
Yes.
And Mr. Wolfinger?
Yes.
Motion to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 12824 passes 10-0. Councilmember Wolfinger.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record a temporary resolution 128-24.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 12824. Councilmember Wolfinger.
Thank you. The City of Lancaster Auditor's Office received $300,999.38 regarding the transit federal grant that really belongs to the Fairfield County Commissioners, and this is to that transfer.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. Bizjack?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoop?
Yes.
Mr. Luchtenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Wing?
Yes.
Mr. Wolfinger?
Yes.
Motion to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record. Temporary Resolution 12824 passes 10-0. That is the conclusion of the reading of resolutions for this evening's meeting. We will now move on to the reading of ordinances, beginning with the third reading of temporary ordinance 3424.
An ordinance to authorize the amendment of the Joint Economic Development District contract between the City of Lancaster and Violet Township and to declare an emergency. Requested by Economic Development Committee, Mrs. Hoop, and Mrs. Kreitz.
Councilmember Hoop.
Yes, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 3424.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 3424. Councilmember Hoop, any discussion?
No, this just expands JED to include another property.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. Bizjack?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoop?
Yes.
Mr. Leuchtenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Teener? Mr. Wing?
Yes.
And Mr. Wolfinger?
Yes.
Motion to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 3424 passes 10-0. Temporary ordinance 3524.
An ordinance to repeal Lancaster Codified Ordinance, Part 1, Administrative Code, Title 5, Administrative Chapter 139, Public Transit Board of the Codified Ordinance to the City of Lancaster, requested by Law Committee, and Mrs. Kreitz and Mr. Wolfinger.
Councilmember Kreitz.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 35-24.
Second. Sorry.
I had on my one.
Yeah, no, you're good.
Okay.
I'm one ahead of you.
Okay. I second. Thank you. I couldn't mess it up.
Any further discussion? Councilmember Kreitz.
Yes, just briefly. This is to clean up the code now that the city's transit operations moved to the county.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. Bizjack?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoop?
Yes.
Mr. Leuchtenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Wing?
Yes.
And Mr. Wolfinger?
Yes.
Motion to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 3424 passes 10-0. Temporary ordinance 3624.
An ordinance to repeal Lancaster Codified Ordinance, Part 1, Administrative Code, Title 5, Administrative Chapter 130, Service Safety Board of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Lancaster, requested by Law Committee, Mrs. Kreitz and Mr. Schoonover.
Councilmember Kreitz.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 36-24.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 3624. Councilmember Kreitz.
Yes, this is just to clean up the code in areas that are no longer applicable.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. Bizjack?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoop?
Yes.
Mr. Leuchtenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Wing?
Yes.
Mr. Wolfinger?
Yes.
Motion to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 3624 passes 10-0. Temporary ordinance 3724.
An ordinance to accept the final plat for LDG Developments Emerald Place project and to declare an emergency. Code Enforcement and Zoning Committee, Mr. Ehlers and Mr. Leuchtenberg.
Councilmember Ehlers.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 3724.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 3724. Councilmember Ehlers.
So this is just to accept the final plat. They're dedicating a right-of-way so that they can have a turn lane off of there. And this, just as a reminder, this development is going to be in just north of the sanitation plant.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. Bizjack?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoop?
Yes.
Mr. Leuchtenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Wing?
Yes.
And Mr. Wolfinger?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 3724 passes 10-0. Temporary ordinance 3824.
An ordinance to repeal and replace Lancaster Codified Ordinance, Part 7, Business Regulation Code, Chapter 751, Peddlers, requested by Law Committee, Mrs. Kreitz and Mr. Bizjack.
Councilmember Kreitz.
Yes, thank you. Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 38-24.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 3824. Councilmember Kreitz.
Yes, this adds and updates portion of the code related to criminal background checks.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. Bizjack?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoop?
Yes.
Mr. Luchtenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Wing?
Yes.
And Mr. Wolfinger?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 3824 passes 10-0. Temporary ordinance 3924.
An ordinance to repeal and replace Lancaster Codified Ordinance, Part 9, Streets, Utilities, and Public Services Code, Title 1, Streets and Sidewalks, Chapter 903, Sidewalks. And this is Law Committee with Mrs. Kreitz and Mr. Wolfinger.
Councilmember Kreitz.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter written record ordinance temporarily numbered 39-24.
Second.
We have a motion and second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 3924. Councilmember Kreitz.
Yes, thank you. This will update the code regarding micro-mobility devices, including prohibiting them from the central business district for safety reasons.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. Bizjack?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoop?
Yes.
Mr. Luchtenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Wing?
Yes.
And Mr. Wolfinger?
Yes.
Motion to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 3924 passes 10-0. There are no second readings this evening. We move to the first readings, beginning with, of ordinances, beginning with temporary ordinance 4224.
An ordinance providing the issuance and sale of notes in the maximum principal amount of $360,000 in anticipation of the issuance of bonds for the purpose of paying the cost of the renovation in existing building for the use by the city's municipal court, together with all necessary appurtenances thereto, and declaring an emergency. This is Finance Committee with Mr. Wolfinger and Mr. Ailes.
Councilmember Wolfinger.
This will be the first of two readings.
First of two readings on temporary ordinance 4224. Temporary ordinance 4324.
An ordinance providing the issuance and sale of revenue notes in the aggregate principal amount of $715,555.42 to pay cost of improving Edie Road, Memorial Drive, and Michaels Way by grading, widening, paving, curbing, and improving bridges and railroad crossings, relocating utilities and installing sidewalks, traffic signals and signs, and water, sanitary, and stormwater lines and facilities, together with all necessary appurtenances thereto, and declare an emergency. The Finance Committee, Mr. Wolfinger and Mr. Ehlers.
Councilmember Wolfinger.
The first of two readings, please.
Thank you. Now move to temporary ordinance 4424.
An ordinance providing the issuance and sale of a revenue note in the aggregate principal amount of $221,964.23 to reimburse Flagstar Bank FSB for the draw on the letter of credit in connection with the cost of improving Edie Road, Memorial Drive, Michaels Way by grading, widening, paving, curbing, and improving bridges and railroad crossings, relocating utilities and installing sidewalks, traffic signals and signs, and water, sanitary and stormwater lines and facilities, together with all necessary appurtenances thereto, and declaring an emergency. Again, Finance Committee, Mr. Wolfinger, and Mr. Ailes.
Okay, Mr. Finance. Can we, what's your
I
pleasure?
don't care what you call me, just call me.
All right. What's your pleasure?
That'll be the first of two readings, please.
First of two readings on temporary ordinance 4424, temporary ordinance 4524.
An ordinance to establish the benefits, titles, and compensation for the Information Technology Administrator, Office of the Clerk of Court, employed by the City of Lancaster, Ohio, commencing the first pay period of 2025, and to declare an emergency. Administrative Committee, Mr. Luchtenberg and Mr. Bizjack.
Councilmember Luchtenberg.
First of three readings.
First of three readings on temporary ordinance 4524, temporary ordinance 4624.
An ordinance to establish benefits, titles, and compensation for Fairfield County Municipal Court Management and professional personnel employed by the City of Lancaster, Ohio for the year 2025, and to declare an emergency. Administrative Committee, Mr. Luchtenberg and Mr. Wolfinger.
Councilmember Luchtenberg.
First of three readings.
First of three readings on temporary ordinance 4624. temporary ordinance 4724.
An ordinance to establish benefits, titles, and compensation for Fairfield County Municipal Court judicial and probation personnel employed by the city of Lancaster, Ohio for the year 2025 and to declare an emergency. Administrative Committee, Mr. Leuchtenberg and Mr. Bizjack.
Councilmember Leuchtenberg.
First of three readings.
First of three readings on temporary ordinance 4724. I see a pattern here. I see a pattern. Temporary ordinance 4824.
An ordinance to establish the benefits, titles, and compensation for management and professional personnel employed by the city of Lancaster, Ohio for the year 2025 and to declare an emergency. Administrative Committee, Mr. Leuchtenberg and Mr. Wolfinger.
Councilmember Leuchtenberg.
Once again, first of three readings.
First of three readings on temporary ordinance 4824, temporary ordinance 4924.
An ordinance to establish benefits, titles, and compensation for those employees who are not members of the recognized bargaining units employed by the city of Lancaster, Ohio for the year 2025 and to declare an emergency. Administrative Committee, Mr. Leuchtenberg and Mr. Bizjack.
Councilmember Leuchtenberg.
First of three readings.
First of three readings on temporary ordinance 4924, temporary ordinance 5024.
An ordinance to establish the compensation for seasonal interns employed by the city of Lancaster, Ohio, commencing during the summer of 2025 and to declare an emergency. Administrative Committee, Mr. Leuchtenberg and Mr. Wolfinger.
Councilmember Leuchtenberg.
First of three readings.
First of three readings on temporary ordinance 5024. Finally, temporary ordinance 5124.
An ordinance to establish benefits, titles, and compensation for Parks and Recreation personnel employed by the city of Lancaster, Ohio for the year 2025 and to declare an emergency. Administrative Committee, Mr. Leuchtenberg and Mr. Bizjack.
Councilmember Leuchtenberg.
First of three readings.
First of three readings on temporary ordinance 5124. That is the conclusion of the reading of ordinances for this evening's meeting. There is no tabled legislation this evening. Is there any unfinished business by council members? Hearing none. New business. We have been asked to appoint a council member to serve on the Tree Commission Review Committee by the mayor, and it has been presented to me that Councilmember Ailes is willing to do this service, and if that is the case, I would take a motion. Motion.
Second.
And we have Councilmember Teener motioning, seconding, Councilmember Wing. Could you please call the roll?
Oh, sorry. Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. Bizjack?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoop?
Yes.
Mr. Leuchtenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Teener? Mr. Wing?
Yes.
And Mr. Wolfinger?
Yes.
So, with great plum and happiness, we now have appointed you to the Tree Review
It's my
Commission.
honor to serve.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Ailes. So, the announcement of scheduled meetings.
November 25th at 6:30 PM in council chambers. December 9th at 6:30 for council chambers.
So those will be our two remaining meetings for 2024, everyone. As we're getting closer here, I know the schedule's busier, but we appreciate everybody's patience. So, and there are no special meetings, now the regularly scheduled committee meetings.
Water Pollution Committee, November 22nd at 7:30 a.m., City Hall, 1897 Conference Room. Service Committee, December 6th at 8 a.m., City Hall, 1897 Conference Room. Administrative Service Committee, December 18th at 8 a.m., City Hall, 1897 Conference Room.
Thank you. Reading of bills.
MNCO for $86.56.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion, we pay the bill.
A motion and second to pay bill. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Bills paid. No need for executive session. At this time, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. President, I'd like to make that motion, we adjourn.
We have a motion and second to adjourn. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Thank you, everybody. Please remember to sign your legislation this evening. We have quite a bit of it that needs signed. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Corey Clark with Fairfield County Job and Family Services. Our mission is to protect children and elderly, encourage family stability, and promote self-reliance for a stronger community. This month, when you buy a car, truck, or SUV from Buckeye Toyota or Buckeye Honda, their Buckeye Cares program will make a donation with every vehicle they sell. From all of us at Fairfield County Job and Family Services, thank you, Buckeye, for your ongoing support for local families.
The Frankie Smith Funeral Home and Crematory in Lancaster and the Johnson Smith Funeral Home in Baltimore have a long and wonderful history of serving our community. Feel free to give us a call at 740-653-0652. Stop in and see us at either of our two locations, 405 North Columbus Street in Lancaster and 207 South Main Street in Baltimore. Respect for tradition, regard for change.